This is episode 63 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, I'm Amy Lidster, postdoctoral research fellow at King's College London. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
But what's interesting to me is that Shakespeare isn't actually depicted with the traditional elements of a motto, crest, life dates, or any clothing that would have set him apart in the first portrait associated with his works, which is in the First Folio of 1623.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
The Bard has his own bobblehead figurines, and his likeness has even been made into emojis and memes here in the 21st century. But how much of this likeness is real, and what has posterity simply made up? From the famous Chandos Portrait that was the founding acquisition of England's National Portrait Gallery to the Droeshout portrait that graced the front cover of the First Folio in 1623, how many portraits do we actually have of William Shakespeare? And can we really tell what he looked like? Here to help us get a fresh glimpse into what William Shakespeare looked like is our guest, Rachel Dankert. Rachel is the Learning and Engagement Librarian at Folger's Shakespeare Library, where she helps researchers dig through archives to find just the right artifact to support their work. Her work takes her into vast worlds of historical preservation, special collections, research, and archives at the Folger Library, where she helps take care of many of the Shakespeare portraits on file there. Rachel joins today to help us unpack the portraits of William Shakespeare, to explain just what was the role of pictures and paintings for individuals during the Bard's lifetime, and what can we learn about Shakespeare from these historic paintings. Hello, Rachel. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Cassidy. I'm really excited to be here.
Why were portraits done in the 16th century?
Oh boy, there were lots of reasons to have your portrait painted in the 16th and 17th centuries. People who were, let's face it, mostly elites, wanted to mark their status or include themselves in history. Sometimes they wanted to commemorate loved ones, or they simply had an opportunity and they took it. I've read some really compelling work by Robert Tytler, a scholar who works on early modern painting, and he talks about civic portraiture, which is specifically images of upstanding citizens and local people who their images would have hung in public places, such as a guild hall or another office, as a local leadership signifier. And then there was an increase in all kinds of portraiture because around that time, images in churches were frowned upon. After the events of the English Reformation towards the beginning of the 15th century, or I guess 16th century, sorry about that, newly established doctrine in the nascent Church of England eschewed a lot of imagery in the church. So it actually appears that people brought the imagery into their homes and civic spaces because the church frowned upon having images there. Smaller images were often worn as jewelry, which I think is really interesting. So a couple of famous miniature artists were named Nicholas Hilliard and his student Isaac Oliver, and those were worn either as pendants on necklaces or at their waist, kind of like a pocket watch.
And that's not just memory things. Like I know we've talked about
right.
rings on That Shakespeare Life. So it's not
right.
not just that, but this was like fashionable that people would wear
right.
this
And the people were living. So we have 3 at the Folger Shakespeare Library that are Nicholas Hilliard miniatures of King James, Anne of Denmark, and Prince Henry Frederick, who notably passed away when he was in his teens. But then we also have one of Lettice Knollys, who was an aristocratic woman. And most of those were worn and completed while the sitters were alive. So it was mostly court and aristocratic portraits, and they're only about the size of an egg. So they're really small. And I love one of the art history professors that comes in to research with us told me once that some of the details are so fine that a brush with only a single hair was used to make the brush stroke, which I find amazing.
That is some artistry right there. I don't think I'd have the patience.
Me either. I'm also a really clumsy artist, so
I know, I'd have that all over the place.
Portraits. And then I like to bring it to the now. I think the way we choose to pose for a photograph and filter it translates really well to portrait culture in the early modern period, because a lot of the poses, motifs, and mottos were very self-conscious.
So it really was like a 16th century selfie.
It was, but someone else was doing it. So I think of it as like mall glamour portraits from the 1980s.
Yes. Oh, now we're dating ourselves here, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
That's right.
I have a few of those that will forever stay in boxes. No one's going to see those.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I can't tell my mom to take down my school photos.
Right?
But they told you how to pose in those. But so one of my favorite paintings that I think is a really representative one for what we're talking about is a youthful image of John Donne, the poet and future dean of St. Paul's Church, from around 1595, which is at the National Portrait Gallery in London. And in it, he's very dark and brooding. He's like the ultimate melancholy lover. And he's kind of looking out of the side of his eyes, and he has his arms crossed. And it goes really well with his poetry, I think. So the fact that he's wearing a very dashing hat and single fur glove adds to his mystery and appeal. And
it's very on brand for John.
Very on brand for John Donne. And in fact, the fur glove looks a little bit like a wolf paw. So I think he's kind of got this wild side going. But what's interesting to me is that Shakespeare isn't actually depicted with the traditional elements of a motto, crest, life dates, or any clothing that would have set him apart in the first portrait associated with his works, which is in the First Folio of 1623, as I'm sure your listeners are very familiar with the First Folio. And as far as we know, there's not a painting that inspired the engraved image of him, but the image was commissioned specifically for the book, which is we think is most likely. And only the funerary monument in Holy Trinity Church at Stratford contains traditional symbols like the emblems for labor and death. So it's interesting to me that in the portraits of Shakespeare that people tend to look to, and the ones that we think are of him, are stripped of a lot of the traditional signifying materials that would have appeared on the sides, like a crest or a motto or the date.
So based on this information about what portraiture was being used for, especially the civic portraiture that you're talking about of people wanting to sort of, it was very kind of arrogant aspect to it to have your portrait done. Does it make sense with what we know of Shakespeare's life and status? Would he have sat for one of these portraits?
Oh, Cassidy, it is so hard to know. And people have been talking about this for a really long time. So I do a lot of reading about this, and we're still interested. We know a lot about Shakespeare, which is not what we used to think. But now that we have kind of brought together online a lot of the documentary evidence of his life, we have some good clues about his later in life interests. So as his fame increased, his wealth increased over time, which we know from extant financial records and real estate transactions. We know he was buying and selling real estate, and that someone owed him money and he took the guy to court for it. And he successfully applied for a coat of arms, which is where a new wealth of information has really come out over the past few years, thanks to a lot of research done by Heather Wolf, who's curator of manuscripts here at the Folger. His coat of arms application shows that he was starting to think of himself as someone with status. So in some ways, one of the best depictions of Shakespeare's conception of his own status is the fact that he had begun to enjoy success in the theater and then resurrected what was actually his father's application for a coat of arms and followed it through until the granting of arms. So when he was actually given the coat of arms that we know. I think that the coat of arms actually is a really good visual representation for Shakespeare because it is his name in visual form. So we have the shaking out of the falcon. So when the falcon has its wings off to the side, that's called shaking out. And then we have the spear at a diagonal across the shield that is the lower half of his coat of arms. And so the Shakespeare right there, that's where the name comes in. So it's a created coat of arms, and he had some input, and it was part of a legacy from his father. So in a lot of ways, I think that that's a really good image of Shakespeare. And in the reading room at the Folger, the coat of arms actually adorns the top of every bookcase that we have in the reading room.
So what about the Chandos portrait, though?
Right. So let's move away from the cool coat of arms. So let's go to Shakespeare's face, right? So one of the likeliest paintings to be of Shakespeare from life is, as you mentioned, the Chandos Portrait. And it's the one we're most familiar with because he has the pointy goatee and the earring, and he looks a little rakish and like a fun friend that you would want to go have a beer with. And the painter of the Chandos Portrait may have been in his theatrical company, but the dates are a little conflicting between the dates of the John Taylor who was in Shakespeare's acting company and the John Taylor who belonged to the painter
So we do
Stainer's
know
company.
who painted. And I'm sorry, let's settle this first. Is it Chandos or Chandos?
So I say Chandos. I think that's what it is. It's
okay. So there's a little bit of a tomato.
Exactly.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure I wasn't sounding ridiculous that we're pronouncing this correctly. So, okay, but we do know who painted the Chandos portrait.
It's probably John Taylor, and that's who the National Portrait Gallery assigns as the painter for the painting. And I'm not going to say that it's impossible that it's the same person. It's just the evidence isn't there for lots of reasons.
And it's not an incredibly specific name either. So, who knows which
not at all
which John Taylor from this century he was.
Yes. And the fact that there were many.
Fun. Yeah.
So hard to know. So that's one thing. And I actually feel like the Chandos feels a little unfinished because even though it has the traditional faux oval kind of making a painted frame around the sitter in the portrait, there's no motto or other defining text or emblem. So if people want to go look at the 1595 portrait of John Donne, they can see all of those traditional elements. And then if they look at the Chandos portrait of Shakespeare, it's actually really interesting because it's just the man.
Okay.
So Shakespeare's coat of arms was defended. So that means they went through the process of becoming legitimate around 1602. And so if he had been painted between 1600 and 1610, which is the current dating for the Chandos portrait, I think that he would have probably wanted his coat of arms included in the painting. And that's something that could have been done later. So maybe it was still being disputed. There were some disputes about the coat of arms. Rafe Brooke, one of the College of Arms heralds, was not a big fan of giving Shakespeare a coat of arms. So maybe because it was disputed, it wasn't included. So if it had been me, though, I would have put the coat of arms on everything. But I work somewhere where we do that for Shakespeare. So it's okay. We've got him covered. So I actually enjoy the mystery of not knowing whether the Chandos is of Shakespeare or by John Taylor. I think there's a lot of fun to be had in the mystery, and I like not knowing.
Yes, I mean that's a lot of really great questions that you can ask about that particular portrait. I must say I'm surprised because I kind of hung my hat on the Chandos portrait of this is the most likely picture of Shakespeare. So now I want to know how many verifiable portraits of Shakespeare actually exist. Are there any that we can say this is definitely Shakespeare?
So because we spend a lot of our time talking with people about the facts, ma'am, and just the facts. I think so. One thing is the Chandos website at National Portrait Gallery, they are kind of careful to say we can't say for sure this is Shakespeare. So they are really rigorously going through, and we're coming up with documentary evidence of Shakespeare's life kind of all the time, and things get discovered that really just were filed away. And so I think that over time more will be revealed. That's my personal opinion.
Open up a box that has the thing in there that says.
That's right. I mean, remember 2016, 2 more folios came to light that year.
Exactly.
So
yes.
Let's see what happens in 1620 or in 2023. We knew what happened in 1623.
We live in the 17th century.
I do. Every day I live in the 17th century. So verifiable portraits. There are 2 likenesses we consider to be Shakespeare. So the Martin Droeshout, the younger engraving on the title page of the 1623 First Folio. So that was carved into copper plate and then printed using a printing press. And that was on the First Folio title page. And then the bust of the funerary monument in Holy Trinity Church, Stratford upon Avon. So both likenesses were commissioned posthumously. So Shakespeare was dead. That complicates the life portrait question. And they were commissioned by people who knew Shakespeare. So in the case of the First Folio, John Hemming and Henry Condell were in Shakespeare's theatrical company and organized the idea for the First Folio. So they also were the commissioners probably of the portrait.
So when we say they knew Shakespeare, it's not like they had heard of him or had read his works. This is like, these were his friends. They were very close up. They knew what he would have looked like.
Exactly. And then the Stratford monument was caused to be erected by his daughter, Susanna. So
I did not know that.
Yeah.
What, she ordered this to be made for him?
Right.
Oh, that's so sweet.
It is really nice. So I think that those are both compelling portraits. And if you look at the Stratford bust and you look at the First Folio title page, they look the most similar to each other as compared to with the Chandos. But that one's hard. I'm going to leave the Chandos alone because I think that it could be Shakespeare. I like to look at Shakespeare's eyes when I'm comparing portraits and see, okay, does he have kind of like the deep set eyes and go from there.
Well, and you mentioned the mall portraits earlier. I mean, if you dug out my old glamour shots from, the early 90s, I don't look like that now. So like you could have a verifiable picture of, a modern person from two different periods in their life and they look very, very different. So, I mean, I defer to your expertise, but I assume portraits would work that way too.
I think so too. Yeah.
Okay.
And that is a really good point, Cassidy, because both of the portraits we're talking about right now, the Droeshout engraving and the Stratford bust, both were representations of Shakespeare at the end of his life. So that's really important. If there's a younger painting out there and some of them have been posited, that's very possible.
That it can still be of him and not look the same as others. I know you mentioned John Taylor as being kind of top of the list of people that might have done the Chandos portrait, but do we know about these others as far as who painted them? Like, do we know was it Hemmings and Condell who did the engraving, or did they have that done?
They hired Martin Droeshout, and he was the nephew of another engraver named Martin Droeshout. And there has been also difficulties. Which was it, the elder or the younger?
The dad or the son? Yeah.
All right. It's Martin Droeshout, the younger. And then for the Stratford bust, that was a man named Gerard Johnson. So, and that's carved from stone. And the Stratford monument was made between 1616, which was the year Shakespeare died, and then around 1622, because the monument itself is mentioned in a poem in the First Folio. It's a poem written by Leonard Digges, and he says, "And time dissolves thy Stratford monument." So the First Folio will last longer than the Stratford monument, which is set in stone. So neither of the likenesses are painted on canvas or wood, but the Stratford bust had paint applied to it to look like a living person, effigy style. And then it was whitewashed, thanks Edmund Malone, and then an editor of Shakespeare who took his editing hand also to the Stratford bust. And then it was repainted, or he had it commissioned to be whitewashed. And then it was repainted to look like the original colors, but it's a pretty much consensus that it was far too bright a tone of color for the Stratford monument. So there is a Stratford monument in, of course, Stratford upon Avon, but if you can't get there and you are in Washington, D.C., you can come see a replica in the reading room of the Folger Shakespeare Library.
Is it also too bright of a color, or which color?
It's pretty bright, but I would say it's a little more muted.
Okay.
And it actually sits high up in the reading room above the funereal niche for our founders, Henry and Emily Folger, whose ashes are immured in the wall behind a brass plaque.
Wow. So much significance to that.
I know. It's really, so their tomb marker is Shakespeare's tomb marker. It's really fantastic.
So with all of these portraits, and we've got like the engraving on the front of the folio, and we've got the Chandos portrait that we're kind of sure about, but still some questions. Do we know for sure what William Shakespeare looked like at any point in his life?
I don't think so.
Oh,
I do. So I think that the closest we're going to get is the Droeshout engraving and the Stratford bust. He's bald. He's got some deep set eyes, and he has pretty round face. And I think that that's what he looks like. He may have had a goatee occasionally, but I think that he looked like that. And that's why I think sometimes people struggle with the disconnect between the title page of the First Folio and the Chandos, because he looks
a little
more,
you know, I mean, I love him. I can say that. It's a little frumpy. Yeah.
He is a little.
But
so
that's okay, because he's not famous for being a model. That's all right.
Right. He was a brilliant writer and playwright and poet and actor. So when I think about what he looked like, I also try to picture him in the role of Old King Hamlet, because we know he played that role. And he tended to play the dads. So I like to think that Shakespeare had a dad bod.
A little bit of a stab to the receding hairline there, I think.
Yes.
But you're so right. Like, because that's a very perfect image of him of that. Now, in 2009, Stanley Wells was published saying a portrait known as the Cobb portrait was a picture of Shakespeare done from life. And I'd like you to explain where this particular portrait came from and tie that into your opinion of the Chandos portrait and the Martin
Droeshout.
Thank you.
Yep.
Of his, see, I can read these things, and
that's
then
okay.
People, and I have to say it out loud. But why is that not on your list of realistic portraits of Shakespeare?
So the Cobb portrait,
right?
So just as a little bit of context, the Cobb portrait was owned by Charles Cobb, and that's a lot of where the naming conventions come from for Shakespeare portraiture and paintings in general. They tend to be named after the people who owned them or the artist. And if you don't know the artist, it's about the chain of ownership.
Okay.
So that's Charles Cobb, and he was Archbishop of Dublin in the Church of Ireland, which was the Anglican version in Ireland. And his wife was a descendant of Henry Wriothesley, 3rd Earl of Southampton and patron of Shakespeare. So the bells should be going off in our listeners' heads. Henry Wriothesley, dedicatee of some of Shakespeare's poetry, and sometimes posited as the young boy in the sonnets, or the beautiful lad to whom some of the sonnets may be dedicated. There was a Cobb portrait and a portrait of Henry Wriothesley were passed down together through a family and then acquired by Cobb, inherited by Cobb's wife. So that's often used as evidence for the authenticity of the Cobb portrait of Shakespeare, is the fact that it was
direct connection there.
Yeah, to the Wriothesley portrait. And we actually have a portrait of Henry Wriothesley in our collection too. So it's very fun to compare them. And the Cobb family originally thought the painting depicted a woman because of the long flowing hair. And so then they used that long hair as an argument that Shakespeare wrote some of the love sonnets about Wriothesley. So
so the portrait actually influenced that opinion of the text.
Right. So the Wriothesley portrait had long hair because he notoriously loved to wear his hair long. And so then that would be what Shakespeare may have looked at in his mind's eye when he was doing the sonnets. The Cobb portrait had hair added.
No.
Yeah. Oh, Cassidy, there's a long history of hairline alteration when it comes to Shakespeare portraits, and we will get there because it's weird and wonderful. So using X-ray imaging, we know that hair was added to the portrait, which actually happened to the Chandos. They added hair at the bottom of the Chandos portrait.
You'd think they would give it on the top.
You would think that the poor unfortunates. I know, it's so sad. But so they wanted to make him look more Shakespeare-y, a little more rakish. But the Cobb actually has an asymmetrical haircut that doesn't conform to the contemporary notions of a gentleman's haircut.
Oh, wow. So it's like not even, the additions aren't even period correct.
And there is the Stanley Wells book about another portrait of Shakespeare is really good because it shows the many iterations of the Cobb with and without the hair. And then it goes through and kind of looks at other portraits that are similar. So also the clothing worn in that portrait is used as evidence for its Shakespeareicity, which is a word that I invented.
I'm so going to use this word now. This is definitely in my vocabulary.
Shakespeare's name is perfect for portmanteaus. So the Shakespeareicity, the clothing looks similar to the Droeshout portrait on the First Folio title page, but it's actually a little more ornate in the Cobb portrait and resembles other portraits of other sitters. And so we aren't actually even sure whether the body of the Droeshout portrait was done of Shakespeare. They used to just insert torso here and then put the head on top. And there's actually in the first state of the engraving of the Droeshout portrait, it looks like Shakespeare's head was added later. It's very disconnected. And so I think the clothing is a really difficult argument to make just because it's such
because it would have been normal for it to be kind of a paper doll effect.
Yeah, exactly. That is a perfect word for it. Exactly. So I think the Cobb is probably just another anonymous portrait, and it's a struggle. Sir Thomas Overbury, the poor gentleman, gets assigned and deassigned from Shakespeare-style portraits a lot. So there's a Jansen portrait here at the Folger named after another owner that was once thought to be of Shakespeare and ended up being thought to be of Sir Thomas Overbury, and now we're pretty sure it's of neither of them. So it's very difficult because I feel like there are a lot of gentlemen in the Renaissance who looked very similar to each other, and now they're all being called Shakespeare, and it's really difficult.
So like everything else, you know what you know until you learn something that changes what you thought you knew.
Yes, and there are so many portraits where the hair has been erased to embolden them, to make them look more like Shakespeare as a bald-pated gentleman. And so there's
I'm loving all of this portrait editing.
I feel so bad for the sitters. So there's
17th
a portrait.
Century Photoshop. This is fantastic.
The opposite of what you would want. Yeah. So in the Ashburn portrait, which is of a former alderman for the city of London, he had his hair altered to look more like Shakespeare, but there's a little bit of a shadow on the crown of his head where you can see his original hairline kind of peeking through. Okay. And they altered the life dates, the age and the year so that it would match Shakespeare's. And so when the Henry and Emily Folger went to purchase it, it was sold to them as the Shakespeare portrait. And in fact, it was not. But because sometimes they received photos of the paintings and sometimes not. But if you see a Renaissance gentleman and you already think, I want this portrait of Shakespeare. It's a portrait of Shakespeare. Of course I want it. Then you're going to purchase it kind of regardless. And so that's how we ended up in at least the Folger collection with a really fantastic early modern portrait collection with lots of unidentified sitters.
Okay, so set us straight here in terms of online, particularly social media. There are tons of pictures of Shakespeare, everywhere. And historians and theater enthusiasts, everyone argues over whether the portrait you've assigned to your blog post was really of Shakespeare or not. And you can get a lot of pushback for
I'm sure you get that.
Not using the correct, picture of Shakespeare. So identify for us, just for the record, what is the most reliable portrait of Shakespeare when you want to say this is Shakespeare and make some kind of, statement about him? What's the most reliable image to use?
In my opinion, it's the Droeshout portrait.
Okay.
From the title page of the First Folio.
Done.
Okay.
We've settled that now. Now, was there a death mask made of William Shakespeare, though, when he died?
Okay, so that's a really good question, too. Hildegard Hammerschmidt Hummel, a fabulous name if there ever was.
Droeshout was hard to say.
I know. I had to really take my time with that.
You did very well.
Thank you. I'm going to do it again. Hildegard Hammerschmidt Hummel in the mid-1980s brought to light a Totenmaske, or death mask, which was held at Mainz University. And the mask looks a lot like the Chandos portrait,
Okay.
or really what we want Shakespeare to look like. So it has a goatee, a bald head, and he looks very thoughtful, even in repose.
Okay.
Many of the scholars who work on the Stratford Memorial bust believe that the Stratford Monument was carved from stone based on a death mask. But as far as I know, the death mask doesn't exist.
Okay.
But what we do have a lot of are casts of the Stratford bust, which is a death mask of a death mask.
Okay.
So hanging in the hallway at work, you look up, there's a bronze cast made from the Stratford Memorial. Shakespeare's face is everywhere where I work. And so that is something that happens a lot. It's kind of like when they're for a long time, they did tomb rubbings of the tomb curse, or the curse over Shakespeare's grave. And that's no longer allowed to be done. But we have a few of the rubbings from that. So it's kind of that same thing where you want a keepsake of some sort after you've gone to this place that's very meaningful to a lot of people.
So are there a lot of fake portraits that have been done of Shakespeare? You mentioned all of these different alterations.
Yeah, so the hairline alteration is the cornerstone of faking Shakespeare.
So in terms of spotting one, that's the big thing.
Look at the top of the head.
Okay.
Look at the crown just above the forehead, or five head, depending on how bald he's been made. And just kind of see, does he have a hairline alteration? I think that's the best place to look. But what's really interesting is most Shakespeare portraits are of Shakespeare, in that they are stylized versions of either the Droeshout or the Chandos, or combined somehow. So you'll see some elements where he'll have the hair and the aura of the Chandos portrait, but he'll have the deep set eyes of the Droeshout. So that's actually what's happening in a lot of later Shakespeare portraiture, is these images get repeated and then they've been ingrained in us. And so then when artists turn to painting them, that's what they replicate, is a combination.
So where can we see these portraits? Are they all at one museum? I know you've mentioned several portraits at the Folger, but are they all in one place, or are they spread out all over the world?
They're spread out. So if you want to see the Cobb and really go investigate for yourself, you can go to the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust, which is in Stratford, or the National Portrait Gallery in London. And in fact, the Chandos portrait was the first painting ever acquired by the National Portrait Gallery, and has the distinction of the number 1. So it's NPG 1 is the number of that painting, which I think is really cool.
Yes, that's wonderful.
Says a lot about England, I think, and a lot about their national history. Of course, the Folger has a ton too, but what I think is really interesting and worth thinking about is, so Ben Jonson said in the prefatory poem that faces Shakespeare's picture in the First Folio, look not on his picture, but his book. And so what a lot of artists did, especially in the 18th and 19th centuries, was paint scenes from Shakespeare. And there was a lot of different efforts. The most famous one was the Boydell Shakespeare Gallery. And that is where different artists of really wonderful talent turned their brushes to painting scenes from Shakespeare. And those paintings are wonderful, and they're everywhere. The Folger has a large collection, but it's easy to go to a different museum and see scenes from Shakespeare. John Singer Sargent has a really wonderful painting of Lady Macbeth played by Ellen Terry. So that one is out there too. So it's often either of famous actors and actresses in their roles, or of a stylized version of the scene. So keep your eyes peeled for that, because that's another way that we know Shakespeare, and I think another way to count a Shakespeare portrait, because it's a portrait of his mind.
I think we are sufficiently convinced that a picture really is worth 1,000 words, especially when it comes to pictures of Shakespeare.
That's right.
So if we want to explore some of these 1,000 words worth of picture information, what are some of your favorite books and resources that you would send us to when we want to learn more?
Oh, definitely. And as a librarian, I'm very excited to recommend resources. So I really like Aaron Blake's essay, Shakespeare, Portraiture, Painting, and Prints, which you can find in the Edinburgh Companion to Shakespeare and the Arts. And that's a really wonderful companion from start to finish. So if you're interested in popular culture or more theater related things or movie adaptations or music, it covers it all and really also focuses a lot on visual images. So that's a great one to look at. Stuart Sillars is also a really fabulous resource. He has a couple of books that are great for beginners, and it's Painting Shakespeare and Illustrating Shakespeare. And he does a really nice historical arc covering Shakespeare in image, both the plays and the person. And that's a really good way for people to get their feet wet. There's it's really rigorous, but tons of images, which is partially why I love studying art, because it gives my eyes a little bit of a break. And then earlier I mentioned Robert Titler talking about civic portraiture. There are a couple really good books. So if you just look up his last name, Tittler, you can come by both of those titles. Finally, it can be easiest to get your hands on an old exhibition catalog. You can find them online really easily. And the Morgan Library and Museum held an exhibition some years ago called The Changing Face of Shakespeare. And that was about portraits of Shakespeare through time and how we envision him. And that addresses a lot of the questions that we discussed today. So a couple of my favorite portraits of Shakespeare actually are of imaginings of him. So they still look a lot like the Chandos and the Droeshout, but one is by Thomas Sully, who was an early American painter, and he imagined Shakespeare, painted a portrait in 4 days. He was a couple hundred years after the fact, but it was just a really beautiful image that took not a lot of time, and that's here at the Folger. As well as Umberto Romano has a very stylish 1960s style painting where he's clouded in a blue mist and Shakespeare is blue, but there's still that silhouette of the Chandos happening in there. So I think that I'm waiting for some more people to get creative on their own and do more paintings of Shakespeare. I think we can still work on it.
Very exciting. Cool. Well, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those.
First question, do I have to take Shakespeare with me?
Well, you are given a copy of the complete works, but it's your island. So
I'm kidding. I love Shakespeare. It just is he's a part of my daily life. And so I think I would go to a deserted island for a little bit of a break from work. But I actually, all joking aside, love Shakespeare. My favorite play is Titus Andronicus. Let that inform you however you wish to take it. But so other than that, I would say I would take Pride and Prejudice, because I find that book infinitely rereadable. And that's the point of a desert island book. You get one. And so you have to
you don't want to get bored with it.
Reading that book forever. And so that's what I would pick, because there are so many characters and interior lives that you can untangle and explore and kind of imagine and take it elsewhere. And we know that there's like a whole industry of novel writing built around fleshing out the unknown lives of the people in Pride and Prejudice. But I think that that's like the perfect candidate for me.
Well, that sounds like a very happy deserted island for you, as
thank you,
with all of those there for you. Well, what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
Well, I love my job. So that's number one, what I'm really excited about. I'm going to continue working as the learning and engagement librarian here at the Folger, which means I get to have a lot of great projects in the works where I help orient new researchers, answer reference questions, and lead tours and classes. My number one joke is that as a reference librarian, I research whatever everyone else is researching. So it's been great because I learned a ton. But right now,
we couldn't do it without you.
Thank you. That's so kind. But right now, in my spare time, I'm thinking and reading about dirt and memory in Edmund Spenser's Fairy Queen. So I'm hoping to work that up into an article. There's just a lot in book 2 specifically about sort of the filthiness that comes off of the physical objects that contain memory. And so I'm thinking a lot about that. And then while I was researching for a project here at the Folger for our new digital asset platform, I learned about an actress named Francesca Romana Magdalena Janacek. And she goes by the name Fanny Janacek, and she was a German-American actress who played in a bilingual production of Macbeth with Edwin Booth. And I found a cute detail in which, because Booth did not speak German, Fanny Janacek would pinch him every time he had to respond to one of her lines that she spoke in German.
That's not John Wilkes Booth's brother.
It is John Wilkes Booth's brother, and I have so much to say about Edwin Booth, so I would love to talk to you about that. I am not the expert, but I love talking about it.
Well, this has been a delightful conversation. I know we look forward to having you back in the country one day, but thank you so much for being here. This look into Shakespeare's portraiture has been fascinating. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
To access the links, books, and websites Rachel recommends when you want to learn more about Shakespeare's portraits, make sure you check out today's show notes at cassidycash.com/episode 63. In addition to Rachel's recommended resources, there's also bonus history there about the Chandos Portrait, Cobb Portrait, and the role of paintings for people like William Shakespeare in history. Again, you can find all of this history and resources over at the website by visiting cassidycash.com/episode 63. That's cassidycash.com/EP63. A brand new history mini course will be hitting the membership area in June. It'll be all about Shakespeare's gardens. To get access to the 5 video lessons as well as the digital guides and downloads for how you can make your own Shakespeare garden at home, be sure you check out the members area. Members not only get access to great history material there, but they also get to be producers of the show, which means you help support each and every episode that we do here. And I say thank you by listing your name as a producer in the show notes. If that sounds like fun, where you would like to go behind the episode and learn Shakespeare's history the hands-on way with digital history guides, illustrated maps, and activities that let you experience Shakespeare's history for yourself, consider becoming a member at cassidycash.com/member. That's cassidycash.com/member. That's it for this week here at That Shakespeare Life. I'm Cassidy Cash, that Shakespeare girl, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.